but also in the clinical trial domain or ICH or US FDA regulations. Important domain which some of our speakers will be talking on, the pharmacovigilance specialist, particularly drug safety associate. And here I would like to just mention that India is very specific for the adverse SAE reporting timeline and also SAE related compensation, which is only in India. And therefore, knowing India specific regulation for SAE reporting or compensation is important. Once you do clinical trial, it is important that who writes protocol, how it is written protocol, and also the trial documents. And that's why one area of the job is a medical writer. Clinical trial assistant is also large scope of clinical trial assistant who will assist the sponsor, who will assist the investigator, who will assist the site, and they are the clinical trial. Another domain which is coming up very fast is the site startup. Lots of startup. Professor Dr. Renu Swarup has started this under BIRAC and under DBT, and now we have more than 10,000 startups, and more startups are coming up. Then these startups are sometimes they are go into the valley of death because there is hardly anybody to make them clarity on the rules, regulations, and that is still a larger domain of clinical trial setup. Now, if I just say, having these are the broad domain of the jobs, and our team will gradually make you competent in all of these jobs, maybe today or maybe in subsequent areas. One few words that what is critical, what you should know. And I always say your degree, as I have been talking last time also, your degree, whether MD, PharmD, or Pharm B Pharm, or whatever it is your passport. Passport does not make you eligible to go to any other country. And that is what you have to have a visa. And your visa is a domain specific competence and knowledge. And that's what we want to make you visa holder for all these areas. One common domain which is a very critical is GCP, and particularly Indian GCP. Everybody has to have, and there has been a considerable debate in many industries that they must have the examination before they employ a person, and largely that would contain two things. One is the GCP, and other is the NDCT. In addition to that, we look for what is the innovative thing which you can do, what is the technology which you can adopt, what is the digital tool which you are competent and aware with, how much collaboration you can establish with other, what is the competence with the contemporary strategies to change the style or the pattern of the whether it is adaptive clinical trial, whether it is a in-home clinical trial, whether it is a use of artificial intelligence in clinical trial. So that is a contemporary strategies, what we call as. And decentralized clinical trial after COVID, now we are talking of a much of decentralized clinical trial. And this is much important. The one of the competence, core competence, which all people, whether all the 10 domain which we said should also know, the informed consent. Is informed consent or understood consent for layman, from a person who is the vulnerable person, from a person who is a child, or so on and so forth. And the safety reporting. This is particularly clinical trial related injury. With this, what we are also trying to do is you will listen to all those things. We will also invite your curriculum vitae, whosoever is interested. You just prefer that what specific area you like to pursue later, one or two or maximum three areas, and then make your one page small CV, and we will be happy to forward it to many industry groups who are looking for competent people. It does not mean that this will job, but this will keep you in link with those who are looking for competent people. And this, so thank you very much again. And over to Varun. Over to Tarun, sorry. Yeah, and before I my it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Renu Swarup, who is not only visionary but is a great and most respected science leader in the country. And there are only few science leaders who are command so much of respect just because of the two things: her knowledge and her mission to create human resource which is competent in science. And I always admire, and on her advice, our next uh, workshop or webinar will be women leadership in clinical research in India. And I'm not going to read because that's why I given you time to read what is written here. But this is just tip of iceberg of her credential. And I'm extremely thankful that she not only volunteered to inaugurate this, but she said that she would like to stay here as long as possible in spite of his extremely busy schedule. So over to you, Madam Renu Swarup, for giving your inaugural address to this young mm, potential clinical trialist. Over to you, madam.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gupta. And first of all, my compliments to you and to the entire team that has gone behind organizing this and the series that you have talked about. You rightly said the whole strength of anything that we do is basically the human resource. And today we all have to look at building competent human resource, but when I was talking with you yesterday, you did mention that there are a lot of people who are coming in here who are already in profession. So it's not those who are choosing a career, but those who are already in a career and are looking at opportunities, how to get better and how through your advice, identify areas in which they can excel and then contribute. So, this whole area of leadership development, whether it's for young professionals to enter a career or for leaders to be built, I think that's so very important for everyone. And of course, a special mention for women leadership, which I always talk about. But I think this is really wonderful what you're doing. I would also like to congratulate this 120 or 150 delegates and participants who have actually made the effort to join this course of yours, to join this webinar. That shows your keenness to get into this very important area of clinical trial, clinical research. Professor Gupta has already outlined what are the various fields, what are the job opportunities, and I'm confident that you identified this as an area which is of interest to you. And then you have come forward to be able to take it on, because you know what I'm going to speak to you for in the next about 10 minutes is how important it is to identify what you like and how you want to pursue that further, because only then can you give your 100%. If it is something that you've just done by the way, or just said, okay, there is a webinar and my 10 other friends are joining it, so I will also join it, believe me, that doesn't give you that satisfaction. And those days of school are over, where we would look at sitting with our friends on the common bench, or if we would all want to sit either on the back bench or the front bench. Once you move out of your college, initial school and college, you then have to decide your career, and then it's you yourself who has to take it ahead. Friendship remains, which is very important. Bonds of friendship help you to move ahead, but the career has to be your decision. So it's important to see how do you prepare for this career? What do you understand by what a career is? What is really a career? Is a career something that, okay, I've taken a job today? So a job is very different from a career. A job is something that you do fine, which everyone does need to do, and that is to take back a salary package, which with which our homes run, which also takes it ahead. But what really is a career is important. And I think that is what you're trying to take through this series of webinar to understand. Who are you really pleasing when you're identifying that field in which you're getting forward and the career that you're taking ahead? Is it only a job where you're going in and saying, okay, my boss wants me to do this, so I've completed this task and I've handed over my, like an examination paper or report? Or is it yourself that you're pleasing, that you're getting a job satisfaction from what you're doing? What is your motivation to do that? How would, and this is very important to understand these principles, because if you understand these principles, then as you move into it, you get more and more grounded into that. And the more grounded you are, the better you deliver. And eventually, it's all about how you deliver to a particular career that you've taken on. So, who are you pleasing? It's important. Remember one thing, there are, when we talk about it, they're saying, what is your motivation to perform? There could be organizations which motivate you. There are organizations which have, even the employee of the month awards. There are motivations that you get in terms of awards, instead in terms of pay package, performance pay packages, variable pay packages. Those are all motivations that will keep you going, and very important. When I speak to an organization on how to motivate employees, I will touch upon that topic and tell them how they need to motivate their employees. But today we're talking about you. So remember one thing, the biggest motivation is self motivation. And for self motivation, who's going to set your benchmarks? You have to set your benchmarks. The benchmarks that you set for yourself would be what you know you can deliver, what you know is your competence, what you know is where you want to reach. When you start a career, it's good to be ambitious, but you obviously don't want to be over ambitious. But everyone has an ambition in their career. And that ambition or that path that you see for yourself helps you to set your benchmarks. And out of the 120 or 150 people who are attending this today, as an exercise that you take back home after this webinar is set benchmarks for yourself. Where do you want to see yourself after 5 years? Where do you want to see yourself after 10 years? And believe me, if at some point of time Professor Gupta's academy sort of looks at it, they'll clearly see that each of these would be different. Despite having a common set of talks today, your benchmarks will be different, because that is where introspection is important. And no one better than you can do an introspection to see what your competence levels are. And that competence level has to be judged by you. It's important to do your own competence mapping yourself, because you then identify what your strengths are. And I don't like to use a word weakness in your capabilities, because those are attributes which you identify as where you can make improvements into. You can get better on those. So make the best of your strengths. See how they can help you to get into the career that you're taking forward. But identify those attributes of yours where you need to work upon yourself. And for this, there are various ways in which you can do it, through sessions like this, where you hear inspiring leaders to talk to you, you get knowledge, because knowledge helps you to become very, very strong. And it's that foundation that helps you to move ahead. But it's also important for you to then identify, and many times, role models that you pick up, you don't have one role model, you pick up the best of so many and then put that together. It's like a kitchen recipe. If you take it directly from the recipe book, it may not give the best, but if you go and ask your mother for a recipe, she'll never have a written recipe. She'll put in ingredients as they come in and they deliver the best. So that's really what you need to do, identify attributes which help you to move forward. And those are critical questions that you have to keep in mind as you move into a career. Now, what is important is, as I said, you need to have clarity as to where you want to go. Don't take these careers and professions as a, passing phase. You have to remember that you have to be grounded in what you want to do, and that is where your passion comes from. So if you're interested in clinical research, that's the best that you can do, and that's why you joined this. Dr. Gupta showed you 10 job opportunities, but with your innovation and your knowledge, you may probably, as you grow in your career, this 10 would become, multiplied by the factor of whatever you want to put in. We have so many newer opportunities coming in. We have AI, and all your speakers are going to talk about it. Each of these bring out newer streams as you move ahead. And I think those are the opportunities which you have to look at. And who builds these opportunities? People like you. Innovations just don't fall from the, you don't have our astronauts coming from space and saying, these are new innovations that we offer to you. It's not any, these innovations come through hard research, which is done by our own people. And that research is important. I mean, one which I can immediately point out from what Professor Gupta said today is we clinical research, clinical trials is a very important bridge between research and taking the product to market to society. The pathway is there through which you come in as an important component to it. Today, we are bringing in so many new discoveries, so many new technologies, so many new innovations. And with Pradhan sitting there, the regulators there who will tell you they need to have the new processes for regulation outlined for them. They need to have processes of documentation which need to be given to them to do, regulation for new technologies, innovation. Who brings those in? Who does the research on that? You. So remember one thing, these are not static fields, these are dynamic fields which give you an opportunity to do something new every day. But you must have the passion to be able to deliver that. And how does that come? That comes from your own confidence, your own self-confidence that you will build in. But remember one thing, there's a caution here. Never be overconfident. As you should never be over-ambitious, you should never be overconfident. Because overconfidence kills. Overambition kills. You must keep it at a level at which you can be able to take it forward. The second principle that you have to keep in mind is your value systems. Your own value systems, which you will take to the organization that you get into. And value systems must complement and supplement the values of core values of an organization. Clinical research, we immediately, if I talk to anybody here saying, what are the value systems that you must have for clinical research? While it's true for all professions, but for clinical research, immediately it comes out integrity, ethics, transparency, proficiency, discipline. There could be so many that you bring out. These are so very important. These cannot be given to you by an organization if you are not ready, if you don't have them internally within you, and if you're not ready to give them to the organization. So remember one thing, you must be grounded in what you do. You must have a passion for what you do, and your value system should be so strong that nothing ever can move those value systems away from how they would be able to contribute to taking it ahead. The other point that I would like to emphasize here is, as I said, if you're starting a career because you believe that's a career of your choice, and going back to what I said right in the beginning, differentiate between a job and a career. You get deeply involved in it. And if you get deeply involved in it, as Dr. Gupta rightly said, you don't only have a passport, then you have a visa, which gives you access to certain domain areas where you become proficient in that knowledge. Don't try and ever say, okay, I want to do this also, I want to do that also, and look at 10 different fields that you want to do. You can't. You'll be a jack of all trades and a master of none. You must get deep into one or two or three, which are related fields. And those are the domain areas. So if today you're going to hear about 15 domain areas, all 150 of you cannot join all those 115 areas. There'll be probably segregation between those areas. And that's what Professor Gupta said. They're going to have series of workshops which will then go deep dives into these. So that's really what you need to do. So remember one thing, when you get in as a new recruit to get into any area or just into your career, one thing that you have to do is to learn the ABCD of it. And for the ABCD, I said your A is your ambition. Must have a very, very strong ambition, not an over ambition, to say, what am I going to do in the next couple of years? To be able to fulfill that ambition, to succeed in that ambition, your B is your belief in yourself. Unless and until you believe in yourself, nobody can push you into it. And that belief has to come from you. You have to say, okay, I'm going to be able to do it. That's my confidence in myself. Whatever confidence you may have, whatever belief you may have, the organization will only benefit, your career will only benefit if you have the C in you, and that's your commitment to deliver. You have to give your 100%. People talk about, and it's not only in women leadership programs, mind you, when I talk to many people at this level also, they say, our work-life balances, our work-life, how do we integrate work-life, work and life? I keep saying it's not a work-life integration, it's a work-life balance that you have to maintain. You chose a career for yourself. Like your house needs you, your life needs you completely, the work also needs you. So you have to find your 100% equally balanced between the two. And that work-life balance comes through your commitment to deliver. And the last is your D, and that D is your determination. If you're determined to succeed, you will succeed. And that determination must be something that you take forward and you move ahead with it. My one piece of advice before I wrap it up, because I know that Professor Gupta has many others to come in. And as I was telling Professor Gupta yesterday, that if you get on to a audience like this and you give me the stage, we can talk for hours and hours, because that's our experience of so many years. And today what I'm sharing with you is basically the experience that I've seen. But remember one thing, and my message to all youngsters, and I cannot conclude without this message to you, is never ever see anything as a failure. Many times you say, I did this, but I failed. You never fail. If you've got a determination to succeed, if you've got confidence in yourself, if you believe in yourself, you will see that as the learning on that ladder that you're rising onto. You will be pushed back 2 steps, but you've learned something. What was wrong in those 2 steps that I climbed? Where did I go wrong with it? You will improve and you'll move forward. All of us come from a science-based background. Science experiments, do we ever succeed in the first experiment? No. But we don't call that a failure. We actually say, go back to the drawing board, go back to the methodology page and say, how do we write that earlier? So never, ever say that you failed. That will give you the confidence to move ahead. And the last piece of advice that I would like to give you is, don't be resistant to change. You have to accept change as it moves on. Change doesn't mean change of career. Change does not mean jumping from one domain to the other. Today I've taken up biostatistician in clinical research. Tomorrow I suddenly take up going into a totally different field or space or somewhere, because my statistics area is, and Dr. Pandey will write me, is required in every field. So my thing is, resistant to change means don't close your mind to new opportunities in your field that come in. There are a lot of opportunities that come in, and you must be able to open yourself to that, because that's where we sometimes falter. And when we don't agree to change or take in newer opportunities, we become static. You have to be dynamic in your career as you move on. So good luck to all of you. This is a very promising career. Stay grounded, learn the domain areas, have confidence in yourself. We need you, the country needs you, the whole area of clinical research needs you, clinical trials needs you. And as has been rightly said, India is positioned to be a global leader. If we are going to bring out so many products, how will we do that if we don't have competent human resource? And you are our future on whom we are dependent. So thank you. Thank you, Professor Gupta, for giving me an opportunity to speak to these youngsters. And I hope we will have excellent human resource. And congratulations to you once again. Thank you.
Um, On the behalf of YKG Academy, thank you so much, Dr. Renu ma'am. It was such an inspiring, such a profound talk. Job is very different from career, and truly pleasing self and doing things for self motivation is far better than to pleasing the boss. And I must admit, in the open forum, you have helped me and several other entrepreneurs. And when you said that you have to gain knowledge, create a role model, get clarity, confidence, and get deep into one and not fear failure, you have also, you might not see yourself, but you actually did it on the ground when you were the chairperson of BIRAC. You have created more than 10,000 entrepreneurs, and you have supported them through grants, equity, and you have made them fearless. And thousands of products have come out in the market from literally from Jammu to Chennai, wherever I have personally been, and I'm sure all of participants have seen your vision coming into reality. And I could literally feel what you were saying. And I'm sure with your blessing, love, and enthusiasm, along with Dr. YK Gupta, then everyone around, all the youngsters like myself will gain out of it. And I truly believe when you said one has to have a role model, I think we have found one. And for me, you have always been there, and I'm sure you are truly a legendary individual. And we all consider you as a role model, and we would love to have you in all the other webinars as well. But
Thank you.
before I
Thank you
end,
very much for your kind words. Thank you so much.
it is truly an honor for us to have you. And but one before leaving, I have a question for you, and I'm sure you would love to hear your thoughts, because this is coming from all the people who have registered. So the question is very simple. As a pioneering leader in this field, as everyone know about it, do you believe uh, do you believe that empowering women to to take on leadership role in clinical research is very critical? Means, uh, what are the key shifts or changes do you believe can empower women to take on leadership role in clinical research?
So, Tarun, empowering women for any field is critical. And since you are on clinical research now, take it for clinical research. But let me tell you, empowering women is important in all fields. And this is not a message that I'm saying to you. I mean, this is something globally we are talking about it. You obviously cannot be, moving ahead when 50% of your population is not empowered. And who creates those differences? After all, there are 50% population, but we create those differences and we do not give them that enabling ecosystem that they can then match and come up to the same level of 50%. I'm not saying in quality they cannot match up, but they don't match up in numbers. So who created that differentiation? We as a society created that differentiation. Because believe me, if today when we see numbers increasing, and in certain fields and biosciences, we are fortunate, we see nearly now about 40 to 50% of women participating. Our entrepreneur statistics, when I look at it, they've reached about 30 to 40%. Everything happens with merit. We only create a policy for them. We don't create special slots and say, okay, only this is going to be given to women and not. Why? Because we're giving them a level playing field. So you really need to give them a level playing field. What do? We put those gender tags on jobs. Now if today clinical research, if you don't put a gender tag and say that this is only for men and this is only for women, automatically women get encouraged to come into the participation. And leadership is very, very important. What happens is today we are actually looking at an inverted pyramid where we are not putting our attention to the base. So at the base level, while we do bring in a lot of women into science, into education, in medicine, and many other fields, we generally see the dropouts happening as they move on, or they don't move into professional leadership positions. They start stagnating. So obviously it becomes an inverted pyramid. What we say is we have a small base, and then our expectations are at the top, it should be equal to men. Look at the percentages. When your base is only so skewed and you have only at your base 10% versus the 90%, How will you get 50-50 when you go to the top? So we have to start focusing, and that is what Professor Gupta said. You're going to look at women in leadership for clinical research. You're going to focus on that because you're going to strengthen the base. Once you strengthen the base, give them a level playing field. Believe me, the women don't ask for anything else after that. And all the women in this webinar today will agree with what I say. They move in their own merit. And my message is always not to the women, my message is to all the professionals in the organizations. Treat them as professionals first before you start putting a gender lens on them. They are professionals. They have come out of their house as professionals. They've gone ahead with a career. We start doing that differentiation. But yes, remember one thing, there are socio-cultural security issues which as a society we have created. We have to give them those special, they're not privileges at all. We tag them as privileges. They are special policies that we put in place to ensure that our ecosystem allows them to be able to contribute 100% like their other professional colleagues. Those we have to keep in. So that's for an organization. An organization has to bring in those enabling policies which allows them to move forward. But I think my message is give them that leadership position, let them identify, again, the same message that I've given here, what their strengths are, choose the career and allow them to move in their career. Let's not put those bottlenecks. Let's not start differentiating and saying, this job we will not give them. Today, we have so few women in clinical research. If you bring in women in clinical research, in clinical trials, you see transformational change happening right from identifying priorities for your clinical research. Believe me, and Professor Gupta, you'll agree with me. Today, if women sit on decision-making tables, they will be, and industries, Varun, you come from an industry clinical research priorities change when you have women sitting there. You start looking at, you do look at women health, but we only look at when we talk about clinical research, it's what we need for women health. But when we talk about drugs as a whole, have we actually seen what the data for some of our women related activities? No, because you don't have them participating in clinical trials. So again, that's a long part of debate, but empower women. You will see the results, not just in getting them into clinical research, you'll see how it changes the landscape of our outcomes as we move forward. So, thank you.
Amazing. No, amazing. I think this is absolutely amazing. And looking at the comments as well, this is truly remarkable when you say that women are professionals and what you rightly said, strengthen the base, create a level playing field, and then you don't need to do anything else. And when women truly come into clinical trials and research, I think something remarkable will happen. And you are an epitome of that, of giving freedom and liberty and independence to women. I have seen that personally in Bairak and DBT, and I think everyone has. And with the thought process, the forward thought process that you have, I'm sure if it is instilled in every leader, I'm sure we will see a very transformative India, and with so much enthusiasm, I'm sure this is not too far, and really heartening to see the comments that we are getting on your talk. So inspiring to have you again, and with that, we really like you to continue if you can be part of the webinar today as well as in future series. And on behalf of everyone. We are so thankful that you could take your time out on this busy schedule
Thank
and
you so much.
really
I will
inspire
have
us.
to leave today. I will have to leave today, but my promise to Professor Gupta, I will be part of your future activities. So thank you
You.
very much, Professor Gupta, for giving me this and all the best for your continued seminar. Thank you very much.
Thank you on behalf of everyone. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, thank you. I think the beginning has been absolutely spectacular, and now we would like to start our trigger talks as part of the agenda. And now I would like you to introduce Dr. Shoibal Mukherjee, would be our first speaker. Dr. Shoibal is currently is the clinical director at Medanta, New Delhi. He has held several senior leadership roles at Pfizer, Ranbaxy, GVK, Biosciences, and Quintals. He's been is a pharmaceutical medicine expert with upward of 30 years of experience in drug development. And without much ado, I'm sure everyone, most of us know about him. He's very much visible and he's a very eminent leader. So I would like to invite on the stage Dr. Shoibal for his brief talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tarun. Thanks for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to make a presentation today to this very large crowd. I was not expecting so many people on this webinar, but I understand that it's broken some kind of a record now. Um, so, good afternoon, everybody.
Mm,
Happy to make this presentation today. Um, the topic given to me is emerging trends in clinical research, but I understand that this is about how to prepare yourself for uh, a career in the pharmaceutical industry, perhaps, or in clinical research in general. So this is just a trigger presentation. I have just 4 or 5 slides, and then we will go, I understand, into a panel discussion. So I am looking forward to that. So just a few slides to lay the stage, so to speak. Can I have my first slide, please? Yeah, I think we can go ahead. Let me start by saying, uh, just pointing out to you some macro trends in clinical research. And here I must make a distinction between clinical research and clinical trials. So clinical trials, of course, is a somewhat narrower domain where we are talking of, doing a trial where you put patients to a particular intervention and compare it with something else, and then see whether there are differences between groups and come to some conclusions. Clinical research, on the other hand, is a broader domain. Anything to do with the clinics and anything that is research can be called clinical research. So there are certain macro trends that are going on worldwide in clinical research. Number one, there is an increase in globalization of healthcare product development. Um, when I say globalization, this started a few decades ago. When I started my career in the industry, that was about the time when globalization, really took off, because we had the International Conference on Harmonization, as it was called then. We also had other rules and regulations, particularly the patent regulations, which made it important for India to follow some global norms. And of course, they were to kick in many years later, but they have kicked in now. So that those were turning points. And what the the International Conference on Harmonization did was to make it possible to do clinical trials anywhere in the world and apply to other countries. So India could participate in clinical research that was being done globally, and then that data could be presented to the US FDA or the European Union and get an approval for a drug. This was not the case earlier, and it started happening only after 1995. So that globalization now has come to a very significant point. There is greater integration and relevance of the Indian market for healthcare in global context. So we are not now talking only of India. What we do in India, what companies do here, the research that we conduct in India, even in the non-corporate sector, has an impact on the world. We present it globally, and as your careers progress, the people in this webinar are youngsters. You have probably 20, 30, 40 years of professional life ahead of you. And as you go through that professional life, we will see much greater changes than we have today. So tomorrow, it will be, India, I'm sure, will be in some leadership roles in these areas. And those leaders that have to take the country to that point is the audience that I am so fortunate to have today. So I hope you will keep that in mind, that it's on your shoulders. Uh, the other thing is some somewhat smaller changes that are happening over the years. So the importance of oncology, I wanted to do. Oncology, of course, is treatment of cancer, and 70% of the global pipeline of new molecules that are being researched today are in oncology because of several changes. But one of them was the Human Genome Project, and we've got the Genome India project. So with the advancements in genetics, we are able to understand cancer much better, and therefore the opportunities to treat cancer are increasing on a daily basis. And as a result of that, 70% of the clinical research that is or drug development that is happening worldwide is related to oncology. And then there are newer kinds of molecules. When I joined the industry, they were all small molecules. They were like aspirin type of molecules, an ibuprofen or something like that. These are chemicals. Today, we have so many biologicals, biosimilars. These are very large molecules, much more difficult to manufacture. Fortunately, we have the talent in this country to do so, but these are making a great impact on the kind of research that needs to be done. Cell and gene therapy, once again, is very important. Many of you must have heard of CAR T cell therapies. There are other kinds of cell therapies and gene therapies, and genetically modified cells that are introduced as vaccines or as drugs. And finally, there is in India, we are seeing much more globalization of work. So we have global capability centers. When I joined the industry in the 1990s, it was all about individual international companies or domestic companies that were selling their drug products in India. Uh, and that was the main activity. There was not much research happening. Today, there is not only research which has happened over the last 2 or 3 decades, but today we are seeing global capability centers taking shape in India. What these global capability centers are is a bunch of people, something like 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 people sitting at one center, somewhere in Hyderabad or somewhere in Bangalore, Bombay, or even Delhi, and catering to the needs of that organization across the globe. So there is somebody sitting there in Mumbai who is answering phone calls or making protocols or looking at, let's say, write-ups, pharmacovigilance write-ups, or case reports and things like that for an international uh, group somewhere within the same company. And the other thing that's happening is Indian discoveries are entering drug development. In the past, we did not have local Indian discoveries. They were all copied drugs that we used to market in India. Today, we are having new Indian molecules, and these require a deep amount of knowledge for the people who help develop them through phase 1, 2, and 3 clinical trials. So let's go to the next slide. And then, as I said, there's a difference between clinical trials and clinical research. So going on beyond clinical trials to the bigger picture of clinical research, we see that there is a lot of demand now for data and the analysis of that data. Now, where is that data generated? It is generated in our hospitals. When patients come in, they are not clinical trial patients, they are just normal patients who are seeking treatment at our hospitals, at our clinics, and so on and so forth. And then when they do so, the data is collected. In the past, it used to be collected, the doctor used to listen to the patient and then prescribe something. So the only thing that used to be written used to be the prescription. Today, that has changed. Hospitals are capturing data on electronic format, not only the demographics of the person, but the entire complaints and the investigations, the reports, the diagnostics, the ECGs, the radiographs, the CT scans, everything is on the cloud or in the digital format. And being in the digital format, they can be analyzed. And from that analysis, you can come to conclusions. Similarly, tissue. In a hospital, there is lots of tissue that comes out from the OTs because there is cancer being treated and the tumor needs to be excised, or there is an appendicitis and you remove the appendix. So tissue is coming out, and that tissue can be collected and analyzed. And that analysis can again lead to insights about disease. Then the images themselves. Now, when you look at an X-ray picture, the radiologist can look at it and make a diagnosis. But when you look at many of these images, artificial intelligence can pick out certain things that human eye cannot see. And from that can come insights into how you can diagnose things earlier. You can have screening programs and so on. So what I want to say on this slide is that data, tissue, and images can be treated with artificial intelligence too. And that artificial intelligence, as you have heard so many times over the last couple of years, it just analyzes all of that and makes sense of that data. And why we require artificial intelligence is because the human mind has a limited capacity. We can't analyze millions of records at the same time, which a computer system probably can. And artificial intelligence has shown that we can do that. And there are many types of artificial intelligence. There is natural language processing. There is that kind of artificial intelligence that looks into images, that analyzes genomic data, and so on. And these can lead to improvements in diagnostics, prognostics, and therapeutics. So that's another trend that is happening. If you can go on to the next slide, please. So coming to the skills that you require to get into this world of clinical trials and clinical research, uh, when we come in with into specific, very clearly defined small areas of research, as Dr. Gupta was saying sometime earlier, that there are so many areas in clinical research these days. Earlier, there used to be just a few, maybe one or two roles. Today, we have so many roles in clinical research. You can have monitoring operations. You see those abbreviations at the bottom. Project management. These are people who do the trials. The monitors are looking at the quality of a trial. The project manager is looking at how the trial is progressing. You have the medical writers and the data managers who are then analyzing the data that comes in and then writing reports on it. You have the pharmacovigilance guys who look at the safety information. You have regulatory affairs where how that data is to be submitted to the regulatory authorities, how it has to be presented. These are the people who are looking at it. Then there is quality assurance, which is another group which is looking at it from the outside and seeing whether all the regulations and all the policies and procedures are being followed or not. And then there is the medical science. Can we still stick to that? We have to go a little faster. uh, Medical science, and there's the business development and the relationship management. And as you grow senior, you might have domain knowledge, and Dr. Renu was talking about this, that you have to go deep into some areas. And these are some of the areas where you first go very deeply in, very early in your life. And then as you grow a little more senior, you need to know about the adjacent domains, the other domains that are close by. So a monitoring person also has to then learn about or understand project management. And then he becomes a leader in the clinical operations area or the data operations area. And then you kind of over the years develop more and more competence. And finally, you come to a position where you're managing the entire pipeline. Let's go to the next slide. So some of the skills that you require at the entry level may be your foundational science, the background that you come from. If you're a pharmacist, you need to know your pharmacy well. If you're a doctor, you need to know your medicine well. If you are coming from the data science area, then you need to know data science, understand that. But then everybody in clinical research must know good clinical practice. That is just the bread and butter. Dr. Renu Swarup also mentioned it. Uh, and then there is research ethics and understanding the drug development process. These are very basic. And these you need to know perhaps even before you get a job. But then after those first four items on the left side, you have the remaining items. And there you will see that they are nothing to do with what is taught to you in the colleges in your whichever domain you're coming from. It's more about your softer skills. And these softer skills have to do with how you speak, the language you use, how you communicate, whether you are engaging or not, etc. uh, your analytical skills, whether you're looking into and being able to analyze a situation and come out with solutions, your resourcefulness, which is like how to get things done, attention to detail, whether there are even small mistakes in what you do can give a wrong impression of you. So you must have attention to detail, make sure that everything is going well. The application of mind, you have to, every time you look at a document, read a document, you have to think about it and apply your mind to it. It's just not just reading what is there. You have to understand it fully. Due diligence, dependability, responsiveness, these are some of the skills that you need at the entry level. And then as you become more senior, it changes a little bit. Yeah, you have to begin to understand the quality management framework, the research methodology. You have to understand, even if you're not a biostatistician, a little bit of biostatistics, the pharmaceutical business model, how drug development companies, or for that matter, any healthcare product development company, how it functions, regulations and the drug development pathway, the basic financials and accounting, what a P&L is, things like that, profit and loss, these things you need to understand. And then teamwork and attitude is something that comes in as a soft skill at this level, because it is at this level that your teamwork becomes very, very important. You can't work alone. Uh, then comes the leadership level. After 15, 20 years of experience or more, it's the width of your knowledge that begins to count. How much you know, how much you've been able to pick up in these 20 years of experience is what will put you ahead of the rest of the pack. This networking that is very important at that stage, because when those people who are working in your group, those people who you're leading, when they can't get something done, you have to be able to pick up the phone, call somebody, talk to them, say, get help. All that becomes your responsibility. Adaptability. Dr. Renu Swarup mentioned that change is the only thing that is constant. Now, you have to be able to adapt to that change. Um, and some of the soft skills there is empathy, understanding the other guy, understanding the people who work with you, what they need, uh, how to get them moving to their next career goals. And some of the emerging needs that are coming apart from all of this now is data science and genomics. These are two areas uh, of very high scientific content that we all need to begin to understand to a little bit before for the future, I think. So can we go on to the next slide? Do I have anything else,
Yeah.
Tarun?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So
Th-
that is indeed my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shoaibal. And it came as a total surprise to me that earlier you mentioned that international companies used to sell drugs in India. Now, so heartening to see that global capability centers are built in India, especially Mumbai and Hyderabad, where you mentioned pharmacovigilance write-ups we are doing for some other countries, and local drug discoveries have started from, and also from
Tarun, it's not
people.
only that. Novartis has 5,000 people sitting there in Hyderabad.
Wow,
5,000. They are
wow,
not only doing pharmacovigilance, they are doing everything that is needed to be done at the back end.
wow. Now this is something remarkable and so encouraging for youngsters like
And,
us
and
as
it
well
is
as.
not only Novartis. There are 20 companies that have got GCCs in India today, ranging from 500, 1,000 people to 4,000, 5,000. BMS has another global capability center just next to Novartis in Hyderabad again. So the amount of talent that we will require in the future is enormous, and the audience that you have today is really being sought after.
Wow. No, this is, and so on, also when you mentioned the use of AI for diagnostics, prognostics, and therapeutics is something very encouraging. And I really liked the skills pyramid when you said, and but the one thing which I particularly liked, which I have adopted in my life, is soft skills and how to get things done. I think entry level managerial skills one still can pick up at a college or at mid level, but how to get things done and paying attention to things to ensure we are delivering excellence is something which is very very needed. So but in that and you are an example of that, and because you have made a mark for yourself in the industry. It is such a niche field, and we all look up to you. And with that, many thanks for your talk. And I'm sure all of the participants would love to stay in touch with you, and we would love to invite you for other webinars or physical events that we will be doing in near future as well. So thank you so much from me, myself, as well as the entire team for being present and sharing your experience as well as the presentation and the knowledge.
Thank,
Thank you so very much.
thank you, Tarun. Thank you.
Pleasure is all ours. Moving on, now I would like to call upon the stage to Professor respected R.M. Pandey sir, and I have known sir for many years personally. I still remember sir teaching me statistics when I was very young, and I have learned from him, and that lesson still stays with me. He is a renowned biostatistician with extensive experience in medical research, advisors to both national and international institutions, including WHO and ICMR. To name a few, there are many others. Is member of multiple scientific advisory, national chair at ICMR, former head and professor, Department of Biostatics, AIIMS, New Delhi. There are many other accolades that he has, but with the limited time we have, I'm sure I will not be able to do justice. A great human being and marvelous teacher, teaching the toughest subject for me, which is statistics. And biostatistics has very significant relevance in clinical trial and clinical research. So over to you, sir, for your insights and um, and ensuring our students uh, learn from you during this talk. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tarun, for the kind words, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. So, in next 10 minutes, I'm going to talk about essential knowledge of biostatistics for clinical trials, the topic that is assigned to me. This is basically as the webinar is for preparing for interviews for clinical trial related jobs. So just imagine that you are going to appear as a biostatistician, or maybe not as a biostatistician, you are appearing for some job in clinical trial. So they may ask you things related to biostatistics. So from that point of view, I have just 3 slides. And those 3 slides are, see, for any biostatistician, just biostatistics alone will not help in clinical trial or in any part of medical research. One has to know the design part. So the design part in clinical trial, see, in clinical trial, what happens? It is planned that at the end of the trial, one intervention would be preferred. That's how one plans a clinical trial. Now, what is the criteria for preferring a clinical trial? It could be superiority, it could be equivalence, it could be non-inferiority. So one should have clarity about what is the effect that you are going to use to prefer an intervention at the end of the study. Now, clinical trials are usually parallel clinical trials, but not necessarily all clinical trials are parallel. There are crossover also. Now, even in clinical trial or any study, they generate data. Now, from a statistical point of view, it is very important to see, are the data points related or unrelated. For example, if I have 2 groups and one primary outcome, which I am measuring at a predefined time point, so that's straightforward. I have parallel and my data points are unrelated. But if I have 2 groups, one primary outcome and measuring the outcome repeatedly, then all these repeated data points, they are not independent, right? So then things becomes different. Also, if you are doing a crossover trial, then your data points are not independent. So one has to see the data points that the trial is going to generate. Are they going to be dependent or independent? Because that will have implication on sample size calculation. It will have implication on analysis. Now, randomization is core of clinical trial. One has to see what is the unit of randomization. Your unit of randomization, if your unit of randomization and unit of analysis is same, let's say individual, absolutely no problem. But if your unit of randomization is cluster or group of participants, but the outcome that you are assessing and analyzing is at individual level, that becomes cluster randomized trial. So then this will have implication on statistical part, whether sample size or analysis. Also, method of randomization. That has to be understood. What are the different methods of randomization? Is it odd even, or is it so? What is the method of randomization? There are various methods of randomization. One has to actually be very clear. Also, one has to see, are you doing any stratification at the stage of randomization? Stratified randomization, which is a way of addressing a confounder at the design stage. So that part has to know. Now, all trials not necessarily are blinded. Many trials, it is not possible to do blinding. So where blinding is done, what is blinding? What are the implications of blinding? What are the advantages of blinding? But suppose in a trial where it is not possible to blind, is it possible to achieve the benefit as if this was blinded? Is it possible to blind the outcome assessor so that there is no outcome assessment bias? So those things have to be seen. But the trial, whether blinded or unblinded, how are you going to conceal the allocation? So what is the method of, so people don't generally mention that. And finally, in any clinical trial, there has to be outcome, primary outcome, secondary outcome, and those can be either measured in quantitative terms or in categorical terms or time to event. There is no fourth outcome. Either your outcome is quantitative or categorical or time to event. And depending upon what is your primary outcome, it will have, you do a sample size calculation accordingly and you do the analysis accordingly. Sample size is actually reverse of your data analysis. So if you have your trial and you have done sample size calculation, generated data, and you come to me, then I will see how did you calculate your sample size. I will analyze in the same way. So sample size is basically reverse of the analysis that one is going to do. So at the stage of sample size is one of the statistical part that one should know. So one has to see how many primary objectives I have in the trial. If I have more than one primary objective, it will have implication, because in clinical trial, we are assigned only 5% alpha value. Now, if we have two primary outcomes, that has to be split. Now, even suppose if we have one primary outcome and we are comparing at multiple time points, so alpha has to be, so that part has to be seen. When you so people say this is my trial is superiority, but when it comes to sample size calculation, they don't mention superiority margin or equivalence margin or non-inferiority margin. So that has to be seen. Another important is when sample size calculation is done, the anticipated results are taken from small prior studies. People, what they do is they take the effect size, whatever is the effect size that has been reported in earlier study, that they use for sample size calculation. No, one should use the lower limit of that effect size. One should use the lower limit of the effect size for calculating sample size, so that otherwise, I mean, you are not, see, whatever you anticipate, you are going to get less than that. So that is the basic rule. So considering that, always take lower limit of your 95% CI. Now again, one has to see, are you doing one-time comparison or multiple? So if you're doing repeated measures design, then you have multiple data points. So then sample size is not the number of participants that one has actually enrolled, but the number of data points in related manner, which contain the information about the outcome. Also, one has to see, is there any interim analysis planned or not? Now, if interim analysis is planned, that also will have implication of sample size, because total alpha is 5%. And if there is one interim analysis, then part of 5% has to be spent for interim analysis. So what we are left at the end for final analysis will be less than 5%, and it will have implication of sample size. Also, one has to see what are the stopping rules. Now, various stopping rules will have different alpha spending function. Then one should, very common question is the clarity about what is confidence level, what is power, what is your missing value. Missing value is basically maybe loss to follow up, maybe sample was, so missing value of the outcome. So that all has to be incorporated in your sample size. Now when next please. Now when we come to analysis, that analysis plan has to be clear. How are you the data that you're going to collect, how are you going to deal with it? What is your plan of analysis? Is it is it intention to treat analysis? Is it modified intention to treat analysis? Or is it per protocol analysis? Intention to treat analysis is all randomized will be included in the denominator for analysis. Modified would be, suppose if participants have been randomized and five participants in one group, they did not take even a single dose, then what is the point of including such participants in the analysis? So those are modified ITT. Or it also may be that we enroll the participants, but later we realize, oh, that was wrong inclusion, so they have to be taken out of the denominator. So that is modified ITT. Per protocol would be only, will include only those participants who have adhered to the protocol. Now, what is that adherence? What is that criteria? That has to be listed. Many protocols, they don't say, they don't declare upfront that what will be their major protocol violation, so that they will not be included. So those things have to be written very upfront. And of course, one has to be clear about what statistical tests, what p-value, what confidence interval. So in clinical trial, priority is confidence interval, not only in clinical trial, all research. So because p-value, it does not tell you anything. It only tells you whatever result you have got. Or maybe more extreme than that, how often it could be a chance finding. That's all. It does not tell you it is important or unimportant, right? So one has to really pay more attention to confidence interval. And then also one has to see in the protocol whether subgroup analysis have been a priori defined or not. And lastly, you have to clearly mention what would be the clinical significance. One may do a trial and get a statistically significant result, but that may not be clinically meaningful. So clinically meaningful result would be that at at both the limits of your confidence interval of effect size, if the decision is going to be the same, then your results are clinically significant. That is the meaning of clinical significant. Now, your results may be statistically significant, but at the lower end and the upper end, if the decision is not same, then results are not clinically significant. So accordingly, we have to plan our study. So I have these three slides, and I can hear the buzzer, so I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, and you were right on time. I think that's an attribute that you have, that you are very precise and sharp. So, excellent talk. Sample size is reverse of analysis one is going to do. What a beautiful way of expressing things. And we got to know how many primary objectives one has to consider, and understanding confidence interval, power, what is missing value is something that we rightly expressed. And one has to also look for the criteria for inclusion while doing statistical analysis plan. And lastly, but not what you said is so right, that statistical significance has to match with clinical significance, otherwise things will not align with each other. So an excellent talk, and very rightly said that in clinical trial or research, one has to look at the p-value and the confidence interval, which is extremely important. So I'm sure all the participants would have got a glimpse or a gist of or summary of what all goes into mastering clinical trial and research in terms of statistics or biostatistics. And in our future webinars or on offline courses, I'm sure you will shed more light on how things are done, and students would love to spend time with you in person, and you can pass on your knowledge to them. And but for the meantime, thank you so much. We'll like to hear your talks in the panel discussion, which will follow the trigger talks. And thanks for your time, and thanks for being on time as well. And we're
Yeah.
little running bit late, but thank you for everything, respected sir. Thank you so much. Moving on. So our next speaker at Trigger Talks is Dr. Shubhadeep Sinha, sir. Has more than 25 years experience in pharmaceutical medical pharmacology and pharmaceutical physics physician. He's a pharmaceutical physician who was also an adjunct medical faculty at KMC Manipal and IGIMS Patna. He has held senior leadership positions at leading organizations such as Heterio Group, where he currently as senior vice president and medical director. Apart from that, he has spent time at Dr. Reddy's laboratory, Vimita Labs, and Alquist LLC and Indigene. And a very distinguished individual who has over 30 original research papers and has also written book chapters as well as two full books. And would like to we would like to hear on him because he has worked on and has written on topics like decentralized trials and AI in pharmaceuticals and biosimilars, which are the recent hot topics. And over to you, Dr. Shubhadeep Sinha sir, and for your insights and for sharing. I would love to hear your experience on this topic. Thank you so very much.
So, yeah, I can share my slide, right?
Yes, yes, you are absolutely.
Okay. Is my slide visible?
Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Yes,
Yeah, thank you very
very
much.
much visible. Please go ahead.
Okay. So, first of all, it's an absolute honor to be being given the opportunity to speak in presence of stalwarts such as Professor YK Gupta, whom I thank wholeheartedly for considering me. Dr. A.K. Pradhan and Dr. Shoaib Mukherjee, Dr. Renu Swarup, and all of them have been my, the one whom I'm looked up to. And like many of the people who are in the panel who are wide-eyed, starry-eyed, looking at these gentlemen, I was also similar situation 25 years back when my first interview was taken by Dr. Shobal Mukherjee, and for obvious reason I failed because I was not ready. I had no guidance what to do. I did reach the final round, but at the end there was mismanagement in the way I spoke, my slides. In those days we used to use OHPs, and it dropped. And clearly, those were some of the factors. Besides, I presented a thesis, and nothing beyond that I knew about clinical research. So the one thing he told me was be prepared and start preparing. So all these 25 years I've been preparing and preparing and preparing. And by the time I again appeared for Pfizer interview, Dr. Shoipal had left. Obviously, again, there was something less. But then again, Indian pharma industry grew and a lot of opportunities came up. So I remained in the pharma industry, in the Indian companies, and I'm glad that we have been able there. Even when I started, Dr. YK Gupta was the dean and head of AIIMS. Just to have 1 minute from him was such a opportunity, and this is why I'm this my session is for those starry-eyed people who who are just trying to enter the pharma industry and not really know what to do, where to go, what exactly are the jobs. I mean, I'll give a brief on the clinical development in pharmaceutical industry rather than more than clinical research. So when you talk of clinical research, we with clinical development, we start at product ideation to decide which product to develop first. And then there are MPharms, MDs besides the pharmaceutical development. People it's a cross-functional process where we also help in deciding the what kind of API should be there, what kind of formulation should be there. So it's not just limited to doing clinical trials, but also starts right at the beginning of selecting the product and selecting the right product, followed by obviously after the CMC is developed, chemistry, stability, and all the works have been developed. The product is ready. It undergoes preclinical research, such as pharmacology, toxicology, pharmacokinetics, in vitro studies, and in case of NCs, sometimes PBPK modeling, and a lot of in vitro studies, a lot of pharmacology and a lot of toxicology. So depending on the type of product, whether it's NC or an NB or a generics or a biologics, biosimilar, different requirements are there. And even here, we have a lot of contribution to make. Either you can be part of a toxicology CRO or can be part of a toxicology team, uh, and uh, and then help further the clinical development or the drug development. Then comes the core competency that we are expected to develop, that of pharmacokinetic studies and the late phase studies. So that clearly divided into the early phase studies, where you have the phase 1 studies, drug interaction studies, and then in generics you have the bioequivalent studies, where primarily healthy volunteer studies are there, and the late phase studies. So these are the core component of the clinical evidence that is generated against that of a drug product or a medical product. Pharmacovigilance, although we all think that it is once the drug is approved, then pharmacovigilance starts. But then the pharmacovigilance starts right at the beginning of the drug development. So even preclinical studies have some components of pharmacovigilance. Clinical trials, a lot of adverse events get generated. That is also pharmacovigilance. But in core, the pharmacovigilance is case processing, aggregate reports, RMP signal management, and all of that. We'll discuss that. And then post-marketing support, the medical affairs, then real-world evidence studies, which is coming up in a big way. There's also roles in in regulatory affairs, writing the ECTD, preclinical and clinical modules, regulatory dossiers, regulatory meetings, and there are several documents. You know why clinical research in India, we have so much patient pool, as well as hospitals, as well as English speaking people, qualified people. So there is no reason why it will not grow further. So there is always a bright prospect. You know that there are clinical trial phases, and you can be anywhere. And anybody who's in science can be in clinical research, but they have to upskill themselves. In pharmaceutical and medical device industry, it can be in hospitals, in SMOs, it can be in contract research organizations or clinical research organizations. They can even be in medical diagnostic laboratories. Some of my friends are in central laboratories, which only do clinical research. The very large KPO and BPO industries, the Accentures, Cognizants, and the TCSs, the qualification, medical graduates or pharmacy or life science postgraduates. This is what you really require. Rest, the job will teach you. Just two of the things, that SMOs and CROs, these are the ones which drive the clinical trials. The SMOs are the site management organizations which are present in the hospitals. Either only the site coordinators are present, the standalone polyclinics and diagnostic facilities. Hospital has a department called, which is for clinical research, which has been nothing but a SMO, which has in-hospital team working coordination with therapeutic specialists and as investigators. And there are certain hospitals and many nursing homes which are meant only for clinical research, and they don't do anything else. The patients are also admitted for clinical research. This is a model which is very prevalent in the West, but India, very few are there. In this field, you can become you can start as a research assistant and then go on to become a clinical research manager and clinical research heads, or you can become a center manager as well, and you can be supporting the clinical trial team. So this is what, and they work in coordination with specialists in investigator the host hospitals. In the CRO outsourcing services or inside the pharma, the clinical trial operations, data management, medical affairs, quality assurance, regulatory liaison and consulting, and clinical trial supply management. With this kind of structure where there's a CRO head, but we all started as me as a medical advisor, some people as clinical research associates, and then go on to be higher up the ladder as project managers or the medical monitors or head medical affairs and so on and so forth. Also, there's a separate quality assurance team where also the pharmacy and science graduates usually postgraduates usually go, and they have a independent existence from the operations team. There's also clinical technology, that is the statisticians and data management, which actually is a very important function, because without them no clinical trial can succeed. And Dr. Pandey has already taken it very nicely. This is what it looks like. You have the clinical operations team undertakes for the late phase site feasibility, site monitoring, site training, site recruitment strategies, ADR reporting. So basically, they are acting on behalf of the sponsor team to ensure that the trial undergoes as per the GCP guidelines, as per the regulatory guidelines at the sites without involving directly with the patients. Whereas in SMO, the team is directly involved with the patients. In the early phase 1B studies, the same team will monitor at study initiation, but they also will be there at the subject dosing, at closeouts, and ensure that besides the monitoring, there's also safety monitoring. There's also regulatory license. So clinical operations is very, very important function, and they are the ones who are the opening batsmen, or you can whatever you can say. They are the ones who have to or be always on their toes. And as you gain in experience, you rise the ladder. Medical affairs is purely for the medical team, doctors, but there is also role for MPharm and MSc Life Sciences in clinical research communications and in data management. So most often these are part of the medical affairs team, especially in my company. But then there is also clinical quality assurance. In the industries that you work in are again, pharmaceutical and biopharma companies, contract research organizations, sites, all of these. The highest is the pharma companies, then the second highest is the clinical contract research organization, and then the investigative sites. Skills have already been discussed. You have to understand the clinical trials, GCP guidelines, have regulatory knowledge, understand protocol development, study monitoring. You need to have analytical skills. The soft skills are not so soft. They are there since you really need to work hard on that. Have critical thinking, have attention to detail, problem solving, and very importantly, interpersonal skills. It's an interactive profession. You have to interact with the investigators, your management, your IT team, your finance team, your own team, and then the cross-functional teams. So that's very, very important, and time management. Pharmacovigilance, again, is a very unique discipline where it's become a very specialized discipline with prominent players in IT, KPOs, Accentures, TCS, Cognizant, etc. And the global capability centers, Dr. Shoaib mentioned, these are some of the global capability centers with thousands of people working then. And even Indian pharma companies have their own, so companies which have been listed have their own pharmacovigilance teams, which are either full team or hybrid team, and some of it being outsourced. And then there are Indian CROs besides the global CROs which do pharmacovigilance activities. Medical information call centers are require pharma and life science postgraduate, and it looks like a call center, but it's a very, very important function for because the adverse event reports start from here. The patients, the doctors, the regulators, they report to this call center, and it is a regulatory mandate requirement to have this call center. It goes through several layers of work like triage, data entry, quality review, medical review, and some of you who might be working on Oracle, Argus, or Alice Global might know this. But this is also a very, very interesting function, and there's a huge career, and probably the more higher paying function. They interact with all these teams like patients, doctors. The sources of adverse events are from all these places. They interact with just like clinical of besides their own team with clinical research team, regulatory affairs, information technology, and other even the legal the rise of the ladder like this, where you have clearly three distinct functions. You have the operations functions, the medical review functions, the quality functions, and the heads report to the head of the company. And remunerations can go start from about 5 lakhs an annum to 150 lakhs per annum, and the sky is the limit. There's again the medical team members and the pharmacy and science team members, those who have different functions. There are medical functions as well as then the case processing team. This is the pharmacovigilance operation team. Start from a junior drug safety associates to senior drug safety associates, team leaders, and as they grow, their work profile also increases from data entry to data entry, quality review to then to further manage the drug safety associates, then manage the team leaders, and then become the service delivery manager. There are medical writing even in safety. You have doctors, pharmacists, life sciences who write several regulatory documents such as PSURs, PEBRAs, PADRs, signal reports, SHA reports, RMPs. These are globally written for global submissions, and a lot of global work happens in pharmacovigilance in India, and this is where again the medical writers, so junior medical writers would probably write some safety reports, some literature review, some narratives. But then when they grow up, they write the full aggregate reports, RMP signals, and then more team leaders. They manage those medical writers, team managers, and then you can become the again medical reviewers. Then initially they are only given medical review of ICSR, then added aggregate reports and RMP signals. Then they become the medical safety lead and the medical directors. So why do you choose this career? Doctors, physicians, nurses, pharmacists, they get first-hand experience with most recent drugs. So it's like a pharmacology course, and you have to read up every time you manage a case, every time you write a report, you read about a drug end to end before you can actually start working on that case or on that report. If there's a global recognition because there's a lot of global work happening, you get an opportunity for publication sometimes and have access to latest medicine for patients. It's a field that takes you beyond the desk or lab jobs, although it's a desk job, but it's beyond that. The learning curve of professional and deployment into job market is smaller, and you can quickly rise up the ladder and reasonably quickly. So you need a sound knowledge, an inquisitive mind, a qualities edge. There is no compromise to error. It's a climb uphill, takes an intense focus and indomitable will. It requires teamwork, great coordination. There's a lots of travel, especially for clinical research professional. Timeline, guideline, these are the two bottom lines. And hard work, and with a bit of luck, you have a great career, great salary, and great perk. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shubhdeep sir, for an amazing.
Last sentence was very interesting. We have great salary and great perks, great future. Great. I'm tempted.
Amazing
And
talk.
timeline and guideline.
Line.
These 2 lines. A deadline also you should have added.
That's right.
No, amazing. I think careers in clinical development, I think you touched upon how one can make career in 6 areas, from starting from product development to preclinical research to clinical research to pharmacovigilance to post marketing to regulatory affairs. I think there's so much one can do. And I was very impressed when you actually categorically mentioned that you can actually make career in, get a job in device industry, CRO, KPO, diagnostic labs, pharma companies. I think there's so much too. And when you said becoming through timeline and guideline, you can become from a research assistant to an head with great career. I think this is something good. And when you rightly said one has to know this GCP, regulatory affairs, and soft skills are not soft. They come with critical thinking and interpersonal skills, because I have personally seen with my own career and I've seen people growing that until unless you know how to work with other teams, which include IT, which people run away with, finance, marketing, you cannot become a great scientist or a great leader. So, and rightly said, bottom line is timeline and guideline. And I wish every participant can take a leaf out of it. We have got multiple requests in our chat board that please share your presentation, because I found it very extensive, very elaborate, very precise as well, and to the point. So thank you so much. I'm sure you have put in a lot of effort in making this presentation for us, for our participants. They all loved it, and we would love to have you more, and love to hear your thoughts in the panel discussion, which is going to come up in next 10 minutes. And
Thank you very much.
thank you. Pleasure is all ours. And our last speaker at the Trigger Talks, Shri A.K. Pradhan sir. He needs no introduction. He's our core team member. He's one of the founder or co-founder at YKG Academy, along with Dr. YK Gupta. He's the former Joint Drug Controller, CDSO, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, has spent more than 30 years in drug regulation and clinical trials, has seen um, thousands of companies, helped thousands of companies see through uh, difficult times in terms of guiding them and assisting them. And we would love to hear his thoughts, sir's thought on what skills, what knowledge base one would require at a young, at both for professionals and students, so that they can become good at what they are doing. Over to you, sir, and looking forward to your thoughts.
Uh, Thank you, Tarun, for these kind words. And I think after, talks of so many stalwarts speakers, right, starting from Professor Gupta to Dr. Sina, on various aspects, everybody has nicely actually given their insights on what are the different areas in clinical trial or so-called clinical research there that regarding the job opportunities and how to prepare yourself. Maybe you are now a student, or you are already in some professions. If you want to make your career as a, in jobs related to clinical trials, obviously you must have some knowledge on regulatory landscape in India as well as the regulatory landscape globally. Because whatever field you choose to be part of your career, I think regulation is one thing which is linked to everything. Whether you are a, medical writer, or you are a clinical research coordinator or assistant, or whatever it may be, whatever job you do, and you want to make that as your career, I think basic regulatory landscape must be known to you. But having said that, if you want to make your career as a regulatory specialist, obviously then different, you have to have your understanding, skills, and regulatory knowledge, which will be at the most, which will be at a much more deeper level, and every aspects of regulation should be known to you, and you should know the details of analytical capability or skills and problem solving, as already mentioned by earlier speakers. Having said that, I will just in 3 or 4 slides, I will take you through the important regulatory landscape for clinical trials. So next slide, please. We know that, when I joined CDSCO, even few years back, 7-8 years back, under Drugs and Cosmetics Act, only one rule was there. That was Drugs and Cosmetics Rules, 1945, under which everything, whatever, whether it is drugs or vaccine or medical device, in vitro diagnostics, stem cell therapy, or tissue-based therapy, xenograft, everything was regulated under the same one rule was there. But we know the kind of, multidisciplinary nature in terms of, therapeutics that are emerging now. And therefore, now there are comprehensive regulation on each of these different areas. Therefore, under the Drugs and Cosmetics Act 1940, right now we have 4 comprehensive rules for regulation of manufacture, sale, distribution, import of drugs, not including the new drugs, obviously. There are Drug Rule 1945, and then for regulation of medical device rules, that is for regulation of medical device and in vitro diagnostics. The medical device rules 2017, that is a comprehensive rules for medical device and in vitro diagnostics. And similarly, for regulation of new drugs and clinical trials, we have new drugs clinical trial rule 2019. And for regulation of cosmetics rules 2020. Those 4 rules are comprehensive in their respective areas. And that has been actually notified by government, keeping in view the difference or variable nature of regulation that is required for regulating all different kinds of medical products. Next slide, please. So, so far as clinical trial regulation is concerned, as I have already mentioned, that before 19th March 2019, new drugs and clinical trials were regulated in India under the Drugs and Cosmetics Rules, 1945. And Schedule Y, which was there to the rules, were the main, guidelines or main schedule which specified the requirements and guidelines for conduct of clinical trial and also approval of new drugs in the country, be it manufacture or import. But now, after notification of that comprehensive new rules, that is new drugs and clinical trial rules, everything related to new drugs and clinical trials are regulated under this rule. And this rule mandate that clinical trial is required to be conducted as per GCP guidelines. That is there since beginning when the trials was regulated under drug rule also. This was the requirement that clinical trial has to be conducted as per GCP guidelines. So here GCP guidelines means obviously GCP guidelines issued by the government of India, as well as you should have understanding and knowledge about the ICH guidelines also. And on top of that, the National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical Research on Human Participants, published by ICMR, is also applicable. Because in new drugs and clinical trial rules, unlike earlier regulatory system where only new drugs and clinical trial of new drugs were regulated, the biomedical and health research has also been included under the new drugs and clinical trial rules. And in that case, that details of requirements or guidelines which is prescribed under National Ethical Guidelines issued by ICMR is also applicable. And the same is also applicable for academic clinical trials in India. These rules contains comprehensive provisions for promoting scientific and ethical clinical research and development of new drugs. Why I am telling, I think if I go to the next slide please, then we will have an understanding that how comprehensive the new drug clinical trial rules and what are the unique features that are there in our new drugs clinical trial rules for regulation of clinical trial. Next slide, please. Next slide.
Just a minute, sir. There are technical issues. Just a minute, sir.
Okay. So as regards to major intervention in clinical trial regulatory regime, as we all know, clinical trial regulatory regime has evolved in India over the years since 1988, when that first Schedule Y and rules related to approval of new drugs and clinical trial was incorporated. And then in 2005, that drugs and cosmetics rules was actually amended, and there are some significant amendments. That is the removal of phase lag. Means that time before that regulation was that if a drug is approved in other country, then we should allow clinical trial one phase below the clinical trial phase in other countries. And that means if it is in phase 3 in other country, then we should grant phase 2 clinical trial only, not the phase 3, not concurrent phase 3 clinical trials. And that phase lag was removed in 2005. And at the same time, all checks and balance were incorporated, like, responsibilities of investigators, ethics committees, and sponsor. for ensuring ethical and scientific clinical research or clinical trials for protecting rights, safety, and well-being of the trial subjects. And also, details regarding, good clinical practice guidelines was also there, and it was also made mandatory that while conducting the clinical trial, good clinical trial practices issued by Government of India has to be followed mandatorily. And then, there are a lot of concerns regarding conduct of clinical trials and the way the clinical trial protocol was reviewed by ethics committee and reviewed by regulators, and also the way the serious adverse events were being handled earlier. And there are a lot of concerns that was raised in various forums, in parliament, in judiciary, and also in media and all these things during the 2010 and 12. And that was so serious concerns, then government actually addresses those concerns by bringing various major, regulatory provisions into our clinical trial regulatory regime. So major things was that, the provisions for providing medical management in case of any injury. These are unique to Indian regulatory regime in clinical trials, because such type of regulation is not there in any other countries. And also provisions was incorporated regarding procedures for examination of serious adverse events and provisions for payment of compensation in case serious adverse events of injury or death are related to clinical trials. That was also unique, and that is existing today also under new drugs clinical trial rules. And this was first incorporated in 2013 because of various concerns raised in our ecosystem. And then also that time there are significant amendment in terms of informed consent documents. And one of the important things that was incorporated, that one copy of the duly signed informed consent form has to be handed over to the trial participants or his representative. That was also one of the important amendment that was brought in 2013. And also various conditions for conduct of clinical trials, including authority for clinical trial inspection and action in case of non-compliance, including debarment from conducting future studies, etc., were incorporated in 2013. Also, one specific requirements was there for ethics committee. That first time the provision was that no ethics committee shall actually review and accord their approval to clinical trial protocol unless they are registered with central licensing authority. That was also incorporated in 2013. And another important aspects I would like to also mention, that audio visual recording of informed consent process. This was exactly one thing which is also unique to Indian regulatory framework so far as regulation of clinical trial is concerned, because nowhere in the world that type of requirement was there. And audio visual recording, obviously in light of order of Supreme Court in 2013, initially through administrative measures it was made mandatory that in all clinical trial subjects of all clinical trials, audio visual recording must be there, and also the documents and the audio visual record must be maintained for inspection by the regulators. But later on, there are a lot of concerns raised by the researchers, by institution, because in many cases, this type of audio-visual recording of all subjects were not feasible, and practically it was very challenging in many research institutes and also in our ecosystem. Then the matter was actually considered by Government of India, and detailed deliberation was held with all stakeholders, including industry experts and also the civil societies and clinical trial activists. And finally, it was decided that audio-visual recording is necessary only in case of vulnerable subjects, and that too in case of clinical trial of new chemical or biological entities, and not for all, trial subjects in all clinical trials. However, it was also mandated that in case of clinical trial with, drugs for HIV or leprosy, only audio recording is adequate. That was also given. And then finally in 2019, that new drugs and clinical trial rules was published by Government of India, and where almost all those earlier unique features related to medical management, serious adverse events, and informed consent documents, or requirements for registration of ethics committees, audiovisual recording, all are there in new drugs clinical trial rules also, including one formula of how to calculate the quantum of compensation in case of clinical trial related injury or death. If it is related to clinical trial, then that formula is also as part of new drugs and clinical trial rules. And all those issues, specifically those unique features which are unique to Indian regulation on clinical trials, were evolved over the last 10 years or so. And in all cases, Professor YK Gupta and I was in CDSO, was fortunate to be part of those development of those regulation and process, including the comprehensive rules of new drugs and clinical trial rules 2019. So if I talk about salient features of that is there in new drugs and clinical trial rules, because as I have already mentioned that earlier under drugs and cosmetics rules, only the clinical trial of new drugs were regulated. And other than those things, all kind of biomedical and health research in human participants, like surgical research or assisted reproductive technology or many other research, were not regulated. But the first time that in 2019 rules, one separate chapter was incorporated for regulation of biomedical and health research. And for that, obviously, the nodal agency is Department of Health Research and ICMRs. And in those cases, the national ethical guidelines issued by ICMRs is applicable and mandatorily to be followed. That is part of rules. And also, in new drug definition, the scope was broadened to include phytopharmaceuticals, living modified organism, monoclonal antibody, cell, stem cell derived product, gene therapy product, xenografts, everything was incorporated in the definition of new drugs, because these are the emerging areas. And provisions for registration of ethics committee, as it was there earlier also, and this is also there in 2019 rules. And one of the important, provisions that was there, that is there in new drugs clinical trial rules, that we have a detailed, guidelines and requirements about the animal toxicity data, or that are required to be generated for conduct of clinical trials with new drug or investigation on new drug, and also for approval of new drugs. However, that was a general requirements and guidelines, but anybody can actually plan and design and develop and conduct the toxicity study as per international ICH guidelines, and that is acceptable also. That was a major changes that was brought into the regulation, because earlier there was concerns that our toxicological requirements for clinical trial and new drug approval was much more stringent as compared to that guidelines or requirements that is there at global levels. And also provisions for deemed approval of clinical trial. That was also a very important provisions which was brought into the clinical trial regulation for promoting the ethical and scientific clinical research or clinical trial in the country. What was that deemed approval provision? I think many of you may be knowing that there is a timelines for processing of application of clinical trial in the regulations. And if no response is received within that prescribed timelines from regulators, then it will be considered that the clinical trial protocol is deemed approved. And however, in that case, before initiation of the clinical trial, the applicant has to intimate the regulators that they had submitted the application and the prescribed timeline is over, and now they can initiate clinical trials in the country because it is considered deemed approved. And also in new drugs clinical trial rules, specific provisions are there for consideration of consider accelerated approval in case of unmet medical need, considering the severity, rarity, or prevalence and availability or lack of alternative treatments. That means if there is a clinical trial which is proposed to be conducted for any serious life-threatening diseases or for a disease which has special relevance to Indian health scenario, or for a disease for which there is high unmet medical need, and then there is a process of accelerated approval. Under accelerated approval process, even the consideration of new drug approval can be based on surrogate endpoints or based on phase 2 clinical trial data. Also, in some cases, the new drugs can be considered for approvals. And clinical trial applications, as we all know, are currently reviewed by CDSO in consultation with subject experts committee, because CDSO has large number of panels of experts in various therapeutic areas, and each and every application of clinical trial, whether it is IND or it is a stem cell or biosimilar product, every application is examined in consultation with the subject expert committee in that specific therapeutic areas. And also, as already earlier there, the provision for analysis of serious adverse events and payment of compensation in case of clinical trial related injury or death in clinical trial, detailed provisions are there. If there is a serious adverse event which is reported during clinical trial, then the responsibility of the sponsors, of the investigators, of the ethics committee, and also responsibility of the regulators, how to report it, how to analyze it, and within the specific timelines. All those timelines are prescribed for investigators, sponsor, and ethics committee, and even for the regulators for analysis and issuing order, whether it is first order is whether the serious adverse event is related to clinical trial or not. And if it is related, then as per the formula, which is also part of the new drug clinical trial rules, the quantum of compensation is to be determined, and the central licensing authority will issue order for payment of compensation. And then compensation has to be provided by the sponsor or his authorized representative within 30 days of issuance of order. So all these regulations, these are specific to Indian clinical trial scenario, regulatory regime. It is not there in anywhere in the world. And there is also provision for pre-submission and post-submission meeting with CDSU for actually regulatory guidance or for seeking regulatory pathways for development of particular product of a particular therapy. And the newly that one regulation that has come into effect, that is registration of CRO. That means as on today, that rule is finalized and rule is there. And it is going to from 1st April 2025, there will be rule that no CROs will conduct any clinical trial of new drug or investigation on new drug unless that CRO is registered with CDSU. And for that purpose also, that online system has already been developed and process is going on for considering applications and registration of CROs. So all those, as I have already mentioned, if somebody wants to make his career in clinical trials related activities, obviously the regulation, some basic knowledge of clinical trial regulation, what are the guidelines and what are the rules regulation that is available, that must be known. and all kinds of skills and knowledge on regulation, and also how to actually address an issue if it arises during the dispute or during because in many clinical trial when I was as a regulator, I have seen that in many a time there are a lot of disputes between sponsor and the investigators. One start complaining with the others regarding non-compliance or non-adherence, or there are some issues. So as a regulatory specialist, if you are on that job, you must have clear understanding of complete regulations, and also you have to have skill to identify the problem, to identify and then interpret properly and advise for actions to address those issues. And that will actually help the your companies or institutions to address effectively what is right, what is wrong, because ultimately all the disputes wherever whatever is the source of or origin of that dispute, finally it is settled by the regulators. It comes to the regulators. Although before, after that also there is a stage one can go to the court, but before that regulator has to actually decide finally. Therefore, as a regulatory person, you must have your clear understanding on regulation, in-depth knowledge, and ability to interpret properly the regulation, and also to address the dispute or concerns and regulatory challenges and complexity. And therefore, I think if you want to make your career as a regulatory experts, or even if not as regulatory specialists, if you want to make your career as a in any clinical trial related or clinical research related activities, you must have knowledge and skill on regulation also. So thank you, I think for these opportunities, and I think thank you for listening and your kind attention. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Pradhan. It is such a nice pleasure to always hear from you and hear the latest, what is changing. And I'm sure some of the elements you covered here with the new amendments to the NDCT of September 2024 are really beneficial to the students and the professionals on the webinar. So thank you all the speakers. It is such an immense, knowledgeable session, even for me with years of experience. It is always encouraging to learn. So we are slightly over time, so we will keep it as a rapid panel discussion, very questions focused on skills, but it would only be very fair, and most importantly, without this we cannot proceed if we were not to introduce our powerhouse, and that is Dr. Vikas Bedi. So he's been very patiently but very carefully listening to all the talks. So thank you for joining. And I think I was looking at his profile while it is on the screen. In order to summarize, I will call it as PPP. And it all combines to the powerhouse he is. First P is his experience in pharmacology. I think it is immense years of experience, but if you look at it, it is also diversity across neuroscience, cancer, and even GI. So it is just amazing experience that he brings, and we wanted to leverage that. The second P comes from PGI, which is such a reputed institute, and the amount of knowledge, experience, and interactions that he has, not just with the industry, but with the students, is what we would love to hear and leverage. And the third P is pharmacovigilance. I think a pioneer in that, along with Professor Gupta and a few others, is also one of the key skills that is, as some of the speakers highlighted earlier, is critical to bring and will continue to grow. So welcome, Professor Bedi, and thank you for being with us so patiently for these 2 hours. So let's start with the panel. I think we can take the slides off and have all the panelists on screen. And the idea of this panel discussion was to focus a little bit of more skills and what we see on a day-to-day basis in a pharma industry and how we can leverage your experience and help the students. So let me start with actually Dr. Mehdi or Professor Mehdi and ask a question. So we have seen and we see daily that a lot of sponsors with their clinical trials come to the drug controller, Professor Pradhan, or the subject matter expert or subject expert committee or SECs. In the committee panel, there are pharmacologists, there are subject matter experts, but there are also administrative people who may not be from this domain, but they're policymakers. And the most important thing in that is that there is limited time for a sponsor or a multidisciplinary team, say clinical, medical affairs, etc., to explain their protocol, to explain their proposal, either to seek a regulatory approval or to seek the consent on the trial design, or perhaps to seek a waiver. What would be the top 3 skills that you would advise our students and aspirants here to keep in mind so that when they communicate, the idea is clear and they can achieve the objectives that they want to?
Okay, so thank you very much. And we have been attending all the SAC meeting, IND meeting for a long time, almost more than 25 years. So I think those people, they come for a presentation, that you have a limited time. And with this limited time, we just wanted to tell them that if you can present with the justification, with supporting data, that is more coming the clarity that you have a point to, say that this is going to work. Because sometimes you have a lot of claim, and when you ask, have you done any studies? Did you look any primary data you have or secondary data, in fact, also? So that critically they have to highlight that, and that become very evident. Why some, protocol is immediately cleared, So obviously you have a pre-meeting also. You have any question for an applicant, like morning only we have been had a detailed discussion. Dr. Mukherjee was there, Dr. Sudeep was there. So Mr. Palanji was there. So it is very clear that you should be confident that this is the application you are making, and within stipulated period you are supporting data. So it should be organized actually. Many times, they said, okay, I'll come back to you. So you do not get a second chance because, it is something like that. CDSU had taken a decision that there will be no deliberation. If you do not have a data at that time, you say, next time I'll come back to you. So you're delaying the process from your end on. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Mehdi. And it is such an important element to have the data. And I think just if I could add, it is also about what you know from the data versus what is critical to explain and communicate, because data will always be more than what we have time for. So in order to pick up the insights from the data and really focus on that, I think would be important combination with having good data. But thank you so much. Moving on, I think this is a very nice segue to our next question to Dr. Shoibal. So Dr. Shoibal, I think you mentioned very nicely the capabilities that we have seen evolving and the leverage and the power of the global capability centers, 20 and more. So a question to you, and this also comes from what we do daily for example, at Novartis. There is a lot of data that we get collected as part of our own clinical trial development. Plus, there is a lot of data that we analyze as part of the competition, as in any pharma company would do this. And a lot of this actually, as you rightly said, is done at the knowledge hub, which are often these GCCs with large capabilities. How do you see the role of AI and data analytical skills becoming more critical on top of pharma skills to actually use these data that we have in-house to design our trials better, select the sites which are faster to recruit, so that the probability of success and time to market can be reduced? So what advice would you have for this students here?
I don't know whether, so for the two parts of this question. One is what the global capability centers, how they could leverage probably artificial intelligence. Of course, the students will not be able to do that without access to the data, first of all. And then what skills the students might need to have for them to be able to participate in such AI-driven research and development of knowledge. So for the first part, the funny thing about artificial intelligence is that you've got to give a base model, and then that model trains itself. You don't have to train. In an earlier version of artificial intelligence, we had to train every algorithm to learn what we wanted to learn. Today, they have progressed to the stage where you have to have a base model. That base model can be, coming from many different places, but then you just give them data. They really devour data. They consume data at massive quantities. So you need to have a large amount of data. We see Chat GPT, for example. Now, Chat GPT is trained on the language that is being used in the internet. So there are millions and millions of websites, and it trawls all those websites and reads all those paragraphs, and that is the amount of data that it is trained on. Now, when it comes to medicine, when it comes to pharmaceuticals, the amount of data is much less in comparison. Whereas the internet, and this is a very small part. So yeah, I think even then, I think the technologies will grow over the next few years, and we will see, and we are seeing, in fact, many companies come to us, myself being in a hospital where we generate a lot of data. And so we are in talks with companies which are saying that, no, you don't worry about what is to be asked of the data. If we have the data, then the algorithms will pick out discrepancies and present it to you. And then from those discrepancies, you might get ideas of how to then ask the model to further analyze. So, it becomes an open question. You're not looking for anything particular. You're just asking this program to dig out what might be interesting, and it throws out certain things for you, and then you learn from that, and then so that is one part. And the other part for the students is that obviously all this is a developing science, and there are big corporations and small companies, many of them in India, who are working in artificial intelligence. There are colleges, there are universities that are teaching these tools. And there are many parts of artificial intelligence. It's not just one thing. You could have a large language model. You can have artificial intelligence around data. You can have artificial intelligence around images, and so on and so forth. So learning those things would be critical, and getting to have some idea of the language that is used so that you can communicate with those people who are the technicians who are actually writing the program.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shobal. I think this really is because every second day we hear about how can we use AI to become faster. And I think it's not just AI, but it's also understanding how to use it and then how to analyze the data that comes out of it to then make meaningful decisions. So thank you so much for this insightful information. With that, I would turn around to Professor Pandey, because I think his topic was very interesting about the trial design, the statistics, which is the key in what we do day in and day out every day. Now, one important element of the Pandey is always a debate that we have, and any big pharma company or any pharma company for that matter, is a debate between speed and quality of evidence. Speed to market and quality of evidence. So invariably, we often end up in discussing how can we get faster, how can we have smarter trial designs, but at the same time have evidence that is acceptable by health authorities as well as by the reimbursement agencies. One of the key elements there is often a debate or a discussion about comparators. Now, I wanted to bring in your view to see how do you see that there are in a disease area like diabetes where there are multiple comparators, we may not be able to do a trial with all of them. So we may end up doing indirect comparisons. How do you see that becoming an important skill to learn? Second, we see quite often in trials in oncology or rare diseases, which may just be a single arm. So there is no comparator at all. How do you see that? So these are two extreme ends, one with multiple comparators and we have to make a choice. One, there is no comparator where we have a single arm. How do you see these skills or these trends becoming more important as we move ahead? And what should the students be aware of?
Yeah, thank you. About this multiple, if there are multiple comparators, then which one to take, right? So ideally, one should take the one which is which gives better results. Suppose I have for a given condition, there are 3 comparators available, right? So I will do it with the comparator which is best among the 3, which gives best outcome among the, so that the effect size between this selected comparator and the intervention is less, so that if I am able to demonstrate efficacy with this kind of comparator, then indirectly I can say something about other comparators also which are less efficacious than this. So that is how I would think about. And what was the second question?
The second one is that there is an emerging trend of not having a randomized trial,
okay, yeah,
but
so
doing a single arm. What do you think of that?
See, yeah, so basically, whenever we say anything, they will ask you as compared to what. So having a control group is basically it is must. Otherwise, whatever difference that you report between pre and post, you cannot exclusively attribute to the intervention and in which actually we are interested in. Because in any condition, there will be a whole lot of things happening. So you can only attribute to everything between before and after, not exclusively to the intervention in which actually we are interested in. So that is a limitation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And maybe then quickly to Dr. Pradhan or Shri Pradhan ji, how do you see the regulation in India evolving towards accepting these trials? Because internationally there is acceptance of single arm or limited small size, especially for rare diseases. Do you see that changing in India?
Yeah, thank you for the questions. I think single arm study, I would say, is something whose acceptability will be less or no, unless there is any very specific case, specifically in case of rare disease or so, where absolute there is no therapy to be compared with standard of care or something, and even that case also, that should be compared with placebo, even if there is no standard of care. Therefore, as Dr. Pandey has rightly mentioned, first thing is, yes, you have to have a comparator. If there is no active, control or active comparator, you use placebo, and then I think you can have a justification that this is the protocol, which is a scientific justification. You can actually have results which can be statistically sound, protocol-based study. And however, if any such indication or for a specific study in specific conditions where there is very low number of patients, very rare, and also there is no therapy at all, there may be a case, but again it has to be examined on case by case basis. But the general acceptance and idea is that there must be a comparator. If no active comparator, then at least placebo should be used.
Thank you, Pradhanji. Thank you so much for this insightful information. So let me then move on to Dr. Shubhadeep. So Shwet, because your topic was such interesting one, there are a few questions that we have for you. One, I think, let me start with what you highlighted as the roles in the clinical trial organization, etc. So I think it's staying on to the same topic. Some of the trials that we see now, they include not just endpoint, but they include composite endpoints. Some of the trials also now put more emphasis on patient relevant endpoint than just clinical endpoints. So how do you see that being an emerging trend, and what skills or what additional understanding should the students have to be able to highlight the benefit of that when we finally have a benefit risk assessment?
Thank you, Varun. Now, I think for starters, randomized controlled trial is the gold standard for any regulator anywhere in the world, and especially placebo-controlled trials. And then again, the next option is that of the placebo-controlled trials where there are placebo responses, and then there could be a standard of care. Which is currently available. In case of generics, you will have the comparator innovator as the comparator. So randomized controlled double-blind multicentric trial is the gold standard. Now, this presents a lot of practical difficulties because in certain areas, such as cancers, there are multiple possible endpoints. You can have response rates, you can have survivals, you can have disease progression. So in such cases, there is a combination of endpoints. Especially the best example is a progression-free survival, where you are looking at progression, you're looking at survival at the same time, and that actually helps. It helps the regulator decide that there is disease progression is about the response and survival is about the actual patient survival. So it is not going into overall survival. It will take years. And if you need a cancer drug, which you need earlier, you will obviously need something like this to actually get the efficacy data much before than if you look at survival as a hard endpoint. The other thing we've often seen in the cardiovascular studies where there is composite endpoint of the survival as well as the cardiac outcomes together. So there is both in that cases there is also composite endpoints where there is also blood pressure reduction, there is also survival. Both of them are seen together, and there could also collaborate whether this blood pressure reduction is leading to less evidence of stroke. And so in one endpoint you're able to get the gist. The other thing is, but the problem is there is no guidelines, no specific guidelines for this, and there is a challenge in terms of statistics. Statistics typically looks at a primary endpoint, and then there is a placebo detected effect size, all of that. In that case, it becomes a very big challenge for the statistician to actually design the sample size as well as the statistical assumptions. But it's actually a thing to which is especially for the ones where you actually need the drug early, such as in cancers and cardiovascular diseases. So these are composite endpoints. Now you mentioned about what else? There's one more point you mentioned.
I think that it was a patient relevant endpoint, but
yeah. So patient relevant endpoints is what is relevant to the patient rather than what is relevant to the. So quality of life, for example, is a patient relevant endpoint. In fact, in many cases, you will see that maybe the response rate is super, has more has less relevance than probably the quality of life, especially in say late stage cancer patients, where that becomes more important. But then again, in cancer trials, you also early cancer trials, you need whether response rate, survival is probably more important than the response. Response rate may be low, but survival rates may be high. So depending on the, for example, in COVID-19, now antiviral drug, the viral load reduction was less important than whether there is a prevention of hospitalization and death from COVID-19. That was patient more relevant to the patient. So there is the relevant point, and even composite endpoints are type of what to say, patient relevant endpoints, because it is combining what is relevant to the patient. So there are hard outcomes, there are technical outcomes, there are also patient-reported outcomes such as the quality of life. So these are something what is known as the patient-relevant endpoints. These are basically the practical efforts to ensure that the trial is successful and does not meet up early failure, and the drug comes to the market early with this kind of data. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shubhit. And I think that this small discussion probably does not do justice, because it is such an important topic to understand the difference between these endpoints and what do they mean. Because not only is it very critical to have these correctly set to get the trial to success, but also, where I sit in the organization is the commercial organization. So we also use a lot of this data to have the discussions with our reimbursement agencies, with the HCPs, and only when it is rightly set in the trial can we actually sell the product with the data that we have. So thank you so much. And I think more to come in the workshops that we will have. So I'll just quickly then probably close the panel with one last question to Professor Mehdi. And this goes back to one of the P's of pharmacovigilance. Now, I think one question to you, Professor Mehdi, is that we all know how critical pharmacovigilance is in terms of reporting and as part of the regulatory process. Do you see, or how do you see this also evolving as an opportunity for pharma companies and individuals to then track how the drug is doing in the market, also see what is happening with the competition, and therefore either update the label or update the messages that we could leverage to be competitive in the market? So it's not only a regulatory requirement, but can pharma companies use this to actually be more differentiated and competitive in the crowded space?
Yeah, I think the question is all the companies, when they launch the product, so they go for a marketing authorized holder. So they collect the data and they update the data as per our schedule. It was Y, now it is NDCT rule. 6 monthly to 2 years and yearly 4 years. Or licensing authority can ask the data at any time. So if you see that pharmaceutical companies, like a lot of other speakers already said that our companies are doing pharmacovigilance for other multinational companies. So if I just small example in Chandigarh, I think one of the company had started with 3 people. Now it is more than 3,000 people. So can you imagine the change? And in almost all the metros, there are number of companies they started. Dr. Swarup have already elaborated. So it is also, it's a good career, but if you go for more specifically, like you say, time will come that, you need a forensic pharmacovigilance. I remember during the AIIMS days, 97, 98, I could see when I go to TIFEC, DST, there is only one patent lawyer. Now you see that huge number of lawyers are there on patent or anti-doping. So that is what the change, like I said about forensic, maybe eco, I mean, more specialties are there in pharmacovigilance also, only not generalist pharmacovigilance. But basically for the student, you should be familiar with it, what are the software they're using, how they interpret the data, how do you generate the signal. I just also wanted to tell, other than pharmacovigilance, we need people for devices. We have a lot of gray area. Obviously, we have a regulation 2017 and 20, Dr. Puran has already said, but we need more people in devices. We have more than 8,000 devices. How do we check? How do you do a preclinical data evaluation? So how do you do a clinical trial? Another one important point, I think other people did not mention. I wanted to have a, wanted to take a career in food. It's a huge industry. I have seen many people who work in pharmaceutical later they shifted to food industry. Food with medicinal value. That is also need to be incorporated, and students should know that this is a huge career on the food also. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mehdi. And that's why we call you the powerhouse, because you've given us an idea of an additional topic that we must then do a workshop or a webinar. Thank you so much. With that, I would conclude the rapid discussion. So, thank you all the speakers for giving this audience a wonderful insight of your years of experience. We will keep working with you to make this more broader. With that, I hand it back to Rohini for a quick poll, and then to Professor Gupta and Sri Pradhanji for vote of thanks.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So now we'll conduct a quick poll to gather everyone's inputs regarding our future events. The poll will be live for 2 minutes. I request you all to submit your responses.
Maybe another 30 seconds, Rohini, and then we can close the poll. Okay, I think we have a good response and a clear direction of where we would take this forward. So thank you so much for providing your inputs. And just then quickly to Professor Gupta and Shubhanji to give us a vote of thanks, and thank you all for thank the speakers. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Of all busy schedule, they could stay till end. And my thanks to all the participants, and most importantly, my thanks to the entire organizing team, and including everybody, particularly Sanjana, who has did very good work. And my request to all the participants and their colleagues that if they are interested in sending their CV to us, we will keep it with us, and we get valuable candidate for their purpose. We may just refer it to them as and when they ask for. Keep in touch. We will be meeting you again on a much detailed, specific topics in future. Over to Pradhan sir.
Yeah, I also would like to thanks first of all the panelists who have come today being Saturday, and I think in spite of their busy schedule, they have been in this webinar from the beginning and actively participating in this webinar. I am thankful for them. I am also thankful for all the participants who have participated today, and for their patience and learning and all the details. They have actually detailed insights from the experts and the panelists. And I would also like to thank our organizing team, including Karim and Borin and also Sanjana, Vaini and all other for organizing nicely and coordinating all these activities in a timely manner for efficient conduct of this webinar. So thank you. I think this is all I have to say. But thanks for all for a successful webinar that we have today. Thank you.
Thank you then all for joining. And with that, enjoy the weekend and have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vikas. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
अभी आप चंडीगढ़ में कहाँ पे हो?